The blizzard came without warning on the 3rd day of November, 1878, sweeping down from the Wyoming mountains like a white wall of fury that swallowed the world whole and left nothing behind but cold, howling darkness. Anna Reed had been riding hard since dawn, pushing her sorrel mare along the switchback trail that climbed from the valley town of Clearwater up toward the Calloway homestead, where a woman named Edith Calloway had been laboring with a difficult birth for nearly 2 days. The message had reached Anna the night before, carried by Edith's 12-year-old son, Samuel, who had ridden through the cold with his coat half-buttoned and his eyes wide with fear. Anna had packed her leather medical bag without hesitation, tucking in her forceps, her clean linen strips, her bottle of carbolic solution, her laudanum, and the small jar of dried herbs she had learned to trust as much as any medicine. She had kissed her sleeping neighbor's doorframe for luck, the way her mother had taught her, and set out before the sun had properly cleared the eastern ridgeline. The Calloway homestead was 12 miles from Clearwater, and Anna had ridden it twice before under better conditions. She was 26 years old, small-boned but not fragile, with dark auburn hair she kept pinned under a wide-brimmed hat, and green eyes that missed very little. She had been the only healer in Clearwater for 3 years now, having apprenticed under old Dr. Harlan Price until his hands shook too badly to set bones, and his eyes clouded too much to stitch wounds cleanly. After that, it had simply fallen to Anna. The town council had grumbled about it briefly, because she was a woman and young besides, but Anna had delivered 14 babies, set 22 broken bones, treated every variety of wound that whiskey-fueled frontier life could produce, and the grumbling had eventually faded into grudging respect. She was 3 miles from the Calloway place, at the narrowest part of the mountain trail, when the sky went the color of dirty wool and the wind shifted. Anna pulled her coat tighter and urged her mare, Copper, forward. She had grown up in this territory. She knew what that shift in the wind meant, but knowing and outrunning were two very different things in Wyoming in November. The first real gust hit her from the northwest with the force of a flat hand, nearly unseating her. The snow began 20 seconds later, not gently, not with flurries or forewarning, but all at once and sideways, thick and biting, filling the air so completely that the trail ahead of her dissolved into white nothing. Copper stumbled and Anna felt the ground shift under the mare's hooves. The trail had gone soft at the edge, where the snowmelt of the previous week had loosened the soil, and Copper's right foreleg punched through into nothing. The mare screamed. Anna felt herself thrown. She hit the slope hard, rolled twice, and came to a stop against a pine trunk that knocked the wind from her completely. She lay there for 3 terrible seconds that felt like 3 years, unable to breathe, staring up at the boiling white sky. When her breath finally came back, it came with tears, not from pain exactly, but from the sudden awful understanding that she was alone on a mountain in a blizzard and her horse was hurt. She got to her feet slowly. Every part of her body protested. She turned back toward the trail and found Copper standing 3 paces away, trembling, her right foreleg held awkwardly off the ground. Anna went to her immediately, running her hands down the leg with practiced care, and found the break just above the fetlock. It was bad, the kind of bad that could not be ridden and could not be fixed on a mountainside in a blizzard. Anna pressed her forehead against the mare's neck and whispered an apology, then retrieved her medical bag from the saddlebag and her rifle, and the small bundle of provisions she always carried. And she did what she had to do for the mare quickly, because prolonging it would have been cruelty. After, she stood in the blinding snow with her bag over her shoulder and her rifle in her hand, and she thought about her situation clearly and without panic, because panic was a luxury she had never been able to afford in her line of work. She was 3 miles from the Calloway homestead going forward. She was approximately 9 miles from Clearwater going back. The snow was falling so heavily now that the trail had vanished entirely. She could not see more than 10 feet in any direction. The temperature was dropping fast enough that she could feel it changing on her exposed skin. She needed shelter. That was the first thing. Edith Calloway would have to manage without her, which Anna hated with every professional bone in her body, but there was no reaching anyone in this weather. She needed shelter, and she needed it now. She turned and began moving upslope through the trees, because mountain wisdom said that elevation could sometimes break the worst of a storm's grip, and because she remembered, from a conversation she'd had in Clearwater's general store perhaps 2 months ago, that there was a trapper's cabin somewhere in this stretch of the Absaroka foothills. Old Hennessy at the store had mentioned it while talking about a man who had moved into it. A mountain man, Hennessy had said, in the way people said such things in Clearwater, with a mixture of mild suspicion and reluctant admiration. Name of Lockhart, Noah Lockhart, comes in twice a year for supplies, keeps to himself mostly. Anna had not paid much attention at the time. Now she was paying all of it. She moved through the trees with her head bent against the wind, her rifle over her shoulder, her medical bag clutched against her chest. The cold was becoming genuinely serious. Her fingers, inside her gloves, were going numb. She kept moving because stopping meant freezing, and she was not ready to freeze. She almost walked past the cabin entirely. It was the wood smoke that saved her. One single thread of it, barely distinguishable from the smell of the storm, but there. She turned toward it instinctively, the way a drowning person turns toward air, and 30 feet through a dense screen of pines she saw the dark shape of a low, solid structure. A cabin built into the hillside with its back against the rock face, its roof already bearing 6 inches of new snow, a thin column of smoke rising from a stone chimney before the wind tore it to pieces. A window with oilskin stretched across it, glowing faintly amber from within. Anna Reed walked up to that door and knocked on it with her frozen fist as hard as she was capable of knocking. For a moment there was nothing. Then she heard movement inside, the kind of heavy, unhurried movement that suggested size and deliberateness, and then a latch lifted and the door opened, and Anna looked up. Noah Lockhart filled the doorway the way a barn door fills its frame, completely and without apology. He was at least 6'3", possibly taller, with shoulders broad enough that he had turned slightly sideways to address the door without thinking about it, the way very large men do in spaces not built for them. He was 30 years old, lean but heavily muscled in the way that came from years of genuine physical labor, not vanity, with arms that looked like they had been carved from a different, denser variety of human material. His hair was dark brown and thick, falling to just below his jaw, not untidy but not barbered either, the hair of a man who lived by his own schedule. His jaw was square and shadowed with a week's worth of dark beard. His eyes were the color of deep river water in shade, a gray-green that caught the light and held it. He was wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows despite the cold, because the fire behind him had clearly been burning a while, and he was holding a hunting knife in one hand, a half-cleaned rabbit pelt still in the other. He looked at Anna the way men in the wilderness looked at things that were unexpected but not necessarily threatening, steadily, without immediate expression, taking in information before responding to it. Anna looked back at him with equal steadiness. She was shaking with cold. She was fairly certain she'd bruised 2 ribs when she hit that pine tree, and her mare was dead on the mountainside, but she was not going to stand in this man's doorway looking helpless if she could help it. "I need shelter," she said. Her voice came out steady, which she was proud of. "My horse went lame and I lost the trail. I'm the healer from Clearwater, Anna Reed." He looked at her for one more moment. Then he stepped back from the doorway and opened it wide. "Come in," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, like the rest of him. She stepped inside and the warmth hit her like a physical thing, enveloping her so completely that her knees almost buckled with relief. She locked them firmly and looked around the cabin. It was a single room, larger than it appeared from outside, solidly built with hand-hewn log walls and a packed earth floor covered in elk-hide rugs. There was a stone fireplace at one end with a proper hearth and a cooking crane, currently bearing a cast-iron pot that smelled of venison stew. A plank-end sawhorse table. 2 ladder-back chairs. A wide sleeping platform built into the wall with a thick bearskin blanket. Shelves holding dried herbs, smoked meat, tools, ammunition, a small collection of books, a rack for pelts near the back wall. Everything was functional, purposeful, and clean in the way that a person who lived alone and took their environment seriously kept things clean. He set his knife and pelt down on the table and turned to look at her fully. "Sit," he said, nodding at the chair closest to the fire. "In a moment," she said, because she needed to assess herself first. She set her bag and rifle down carefully and ran her hands along her ribs on the left side, probing. The pain was significant but manageable. Not a full break, she decided. Likely a bad bruise, possibly a hairline crack. Nothing that would prevent her from functioning. He watched her do this without comment, but she saw his eyes move to her left side with a directness that suggested he had noticed the way she was favoring it. "You're hurt," he said. "I fell," she said. "It's manageable." He moved to the fireplace and added a log without apparent concern for whether she accepted his assessment or not. And something about that willingness to simply give her space to handle herself made Anna feel, fractionally, better about being here. She sat. The warmth from the fire began working its way through her coat, through her dress, through skin that had gone numb and cold, and was now reporting in with a great deal of complaint. She pressed her hands together between her knees and waited for the shaking to subside. Noah Lockhart brought her a tin mug of coffee, not offered with ceremony or with words, simply placed in front of her with the same directness that seemed to characterize everything he did. She wrapped both hands around it and drank, and it was hot and strong and tasted in that moment like salvation. "How long do you think the storm will last?" she asked. He had gone back to the table and resumed working on the pelt with unhurried economy. "Sky looked like 2 days when I checked at mid-morning," he said. "Could be more." "2 days," she repeated. "Maybe more," he said again, not unkindly, just accurately. Anna thought of Edith Calloway. She thought of the labor that had already been going 2 days when she left. She closed her eyes for a moment and then opened them, because closing them accomplished nothing, and she had never been the kind of person who indulged in feelings when there was nothing useful that feelings could do. "There's a woman," she said, 3 miles up the trail, the Calloway homestead. She's been in labor since the day before yesterday." He looked up from his work. His river water eyes were serious. "The trail is gone," he said. "You know that." "I know it," she said. "White out already, temp dropping hard. You can't reach her in this." "I know," Anna said, and the words cost her something. He held her gaze for a moment, and there was something in his expression that was not pity, which she would have hated, but something closer to acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of a person who also understood what it meant to be unable to do the thing you were supposed to do. "Calloway have family with her?" he asked. "Her husband, 2 children. An older daughter who I think has helped with births before." He nodded, slow and deliberate. "Then she's got people." It was not dismissal. It was something more useful than that. It was the factual acknowledgement that Anna could not help Edith Calloway tonight, but that Edith Calloway was not entirely alone, and that Anna staying alive was more use to everyone than Anna dying on a mountain trail for a cause that the circumstances had already decided against her. She drank more coffee and let herself believe it, because the alternative was to sit here and torment herself for 2 days straight, and she had more sense than that. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me in." He looked at her briefly with an expression that suggested the words were unnecessary. "Storm like this," he said, "you don't leave a person outside it." Anna nodded. She looked at her hands around the mug. Then she looked up at the cabin again and at the single sleeping platform built into the wall and then back at him. He had already anticipated it. "I'll sleep by the fire," he said before she could work out how to phrase it. "You take the platform." "That's not necessary," she said. "You're in your own home." "It's necessary," he said with calm finality and went back to the pelt. Anna looked at him for a moment, at the broad line of his shoulders, and the steady movement of his hands and the complete absence of any agenda in his manner. and she thought that she had dealt with a considerable variety of men in her 3 years in Clearwater, and this one was different from most of them in ways she couldn't quite articulate yet. She began unwrapping her coat. The evening came early, as evenings did in November storms, the light outside the oilskin window fading from white to gray to near black with considerable speed. Noah fed the fire and ladled 2 bowls of venison stew from the cast-iron pot and set one in front of Anna without asking, which she had already gathered was simply his way of doing things. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He did not fill silence for the sake of filling it. Anna found, somewhat to her surprise, that she did not mind silence at all in his company. There was a quality to his quietness that was not coldness or withdrawal but something more like steadiness, like a deep river rather than a stagnant pool, and she had spent 3 years surrounded by the constant noise and need of a small frontier town, and she had not realized until this particular evening how much she had wanted to simply sit quietly near a warm fire and eat good stew. "This is good," she said, meaning the stew. "Elk," he said. "Took it last week. You've been up here since when?" She asked. He considered the question with the same unhurried care he seemed to apply to everything. "Came up in March. Before that I was in Colorado. What brought you to Wyoming?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of evasion, but the quiet of a man who chose his words carefully because he meant them when he said them. "Needed different country," he said finally. "Colorado got crowded." She understood that, she thought. The relentless push of settlement, the way land that had seemed endless revealed itself to be finite, the way every valley you had thought was yours to breathe in began to fill with fences and smoke. "Where are you from originally?" she asked. "Missouri," he said. "Long time back. You don't sound like Missouri." The corner of his mouth moved barely in something that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to it. "I left when I was 17, he said. "Gave it up." "What did Missouri give you before you left it?" He looked at her across the table. The firelight moved across his face, catching the strong line of his jaw and the depth of his eyes. "Hard winters," he said, "and the knowledge that I did not want to be a farmer." Anna laughed, actually laughed, quietly and genuinely, and something shifted in the air of the cabin. He looked at her with the careful attention of a man who had not heard that particular sound in some time, and was not entirely certain what to do with it. "What brought you to Clearwater?" he asked, which was the first question he had directed at her. "I apprenticed under Dr. Price," she said. "He needed help, I needed work. I stayed because they needed a healer after he retired. No family pulling you elsewhere. My parents died 4 years ago," she said without drama. "Fever, both within a week of each other." She paused. "It was my father's doctoring books I learned from before Price. He wasn't a physician, but he believed in education." Noah was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry about your parents," he said. She looked up at him. He was looking at her with that direct, uncomplicated steadiness, and she realized he meant exactly what he had said and nothing more or less than that. And there was something about the simplicity of it that made her throat tighten unexpectedly. "Thank you," she said. They cleaned up the bowls together, which he had not expected her to do and which she had done anyway. And then Anna attended to the bruise along her ribs with the salve from her bag, while he examined the state of the firewood supply, having turned his back without being asked. She appreciated that too. She was finding herself appreciating a great many things about Noah Lockhart that she had not expected to appreciate when she had knocked on a stranger's door in a blizzard. She got herself settled on the wide sleeping platform, wrapped in the bearskin blanket that smelled of pine and wood smoke, and something she could only describe as wilderness. And she lay listening to the storm assault the cabin from outside and the steady, infrequent sounds of Noah banking the fire and settling himself near the hearth. And she thought she would not sleep at all. And then she slept almost immediately and more deeply than she had in months. She woke in the gray pre-dawn light to the sound of the wind, still howling. She turned over carefully, her ribs reminding her of their situation, and looked across the cabin. Noah was already up, crouched by the fire with a long poker, his back to her. his flannel shirt stretched across his shoulders as he worked. She lay still for a moment, watching him, the unhurried economy of his movements, the quiet competence of a person who was entirely at home in their body and their world. And she felt something stir in her chest that she identified quickly, and then deliberately set aside because she was trapped in a stranger's cabin in a blizzard, and she was a practical woman. She sat up. "Good morning," she said. He looked over his shoulder at her without apparent surprise, which suggested he had known she was awake. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's nearly ready." She got up and found her boots and coat and began to assess her ribs again, more carefully now that the bruising had had time to declare itself. It was worse than the night before in the way that injuries always were by the second day, the swelling proper now, the purple spreading. She pressed systematically along the bone and found no significant displacement. "Bad?" he asked. He was still by the fire, but he was watching her with the attention that had begun to feel like a constant thing about him. "Bruised." "Not broken," she said. "I've got arnica," he said. "On the shelf, third from the left." She looked at him. "You know arnica." "I've been alone a long time," he said simply. "You learn what the plants can do." She found the arnica dried and carefully stored in a small clay jar, and she looked at it with genuine professional interest. "This is well dried," she said. "Did you do this yourself?" "Summer before last," he said. "There's a good stand of it on the south slope." Anna looked at the shelf more carefully now. She saw valerian, dried and bundled. She saw yarrow. She saw what looked like properly dried echinacea root. She saw a small bottle that she suspected, when she opened it, would contain willow bark tincture. "You have a proper medicine shelf," she said, something close to wonder in her voice. "A person bleeds out here," he said, bringing her the coffee. "There's nobody coming to help. So you learn." She turned to look at him directly, this large, quiet man with the mountain water eyes and the careful hands, and she felt another one of those chest-stirring moments that she once again deliberately set aside. They spent the morning in the comfortable, slightly startled way of two strangers, discovering that they are not particularly strange to each other. Anna asked him about the plants on his shelf and what he had learned, and he told her with a directness and intelligence that she found both surprising and not surprising, because she had already begun to understand that Noah Lockhart was a man of considerable depth who simply kept most of it private. He asked her about medicine, real medicine, what she had learned from the books and from Price and from 3 years of practical necessity, and she told him, and she noticed that he listened the way very few people listened, completely and without waiting for his own turn to speak. The storm raged outside, indifferent and absolute. By midday the snow had reached the top of the lower window sill. Noah went out twice, briefly, into the howling white, to check that the woodpile was adequately covered, and to clear snow from the roof edge that was building toward structural concern. Both times Anna watched him go and felt a specific and unreasonable anxiety until he returned, which she told herself was simply the reasonable anxiety of a person dependent on their host and shelter in a dangerous situation. He came back the second time with snow in his hair and a wolf pelt over his arm that he'd retrieved from the woodshed, stomping his boots and shaking his head like a large, dark animal coming in from the cold. "Still bad?" she asked from the fireside, where she had been going through her medical bag and reorganizing it, mostly to have something useful to do. "Worse," he said. He hung the wolf pelt and came to the fire, stretching his hands toward it. His knuckles were reddened from the cold, and she noticed a long, old scar on the back of his left hand, running from the base of his thumb to his wrist, the kind of scar that told a story without offering the words for it. She did not ask about it then, but she found she wanted to. The afternoon deepened, and the light from the oilskin window went gray and then grayer still, and they found themselves, without planning it, in the midst of a genuine conversation, the kind that happens when two people are confined together long enough that the usual social formalities burn away, and what is left is simply who they actually are. He told her about the mountains in Colorado, the places he had been, the winters he had survived alone with the wilderness as his only companion. He told it without self-pity or boasting, simply as fact, the way a person relates what happened when they are not trying to impress but only to be honest. She told him about Clearwater, about the particular loneliness of being the person everyone called but nobody really knew, because the healer occupied a role in a small town that kept them simultaneously essential and separate. The way a minister was essential and separate, held in a kind of respectful distance that had nothing to do with dislike and everything to do with the particular unease that people felt around those who saw them in their most vulnerable moments. "Do you ever want to leave?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "Sometimes," she said. "And then somebody's wife delivers healthy twins that I helped bring into the world, or a boy who had a fever that would have killed him 3 days ago is running in the street again, and I think, this is the thing I'm supposed to do. This is the place I'm supposed to do it in." He was watching her with those gray-green eyes that caught the firelight and held it, and there was something in his expression that she couldn't name precisely, something between admiration and recognition, as though she had said something he had always known the shape of but not the words for. "You're brave," he said, not as a compliment exactly, as an observation. "So are you," she said. "Choosing to live out here alone. That's not bravery," he said. "That's preference." "Sometimes preference is bravery," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and neither of them said anything, and the fire crackled between them, and outside the blizzard continued its work. That night he told her about the scar. He told it the way he told most things, without ornamentation, in the direct, clean language of a man who had thought enough about an experience to have found its honest shape. He had been 22, in the Colorado mountains, and had encountered a trapper who had been less honest in his dealings than his initial presentation suggested. There had been a disagreement about a horse that was, in the way of disagreements in wild country, more significant than a disagreement about a horse. The knife had been the other man's. Noah's response had been his own 2 hands and a calm that he described with such brevity that Anna suspected it had been neither quick nor clean. "The other man," she asked. "Left Colorado shortly after," Noah said. "Without the horse." She looked at the scar on his hand, and then up at his face, and she thought about what it meant to have lived the life he had lived in the places he had lived it, and to have come out of it with the quality of steadiness he carried, the kind that was not emptiness but was something more like having looked at most of what the world could offer in the way of hardship and having found a way to remain whole through it. "You must have been alone a very long time," she said softly. He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. No elaboration, just the word, and in it something she thought might be the first admission of anything like loneliness she had heard from him. She thought about her own loneliness then, the specific kind that came from being surrounded by people who needed her, and yet waking every morning alone in a house that smelled of medicine and no one else. And she thought that perhaps there were 2 people in this cabin who had been alone in ways that others around them could not quite see. They slept. The storm slept not at all. On the morning of the 2nd day, the wind dropped marginally, not enough to travel but enough that the sound of it changed from a roar to a sustained moan, and some quality of the light through the oilskin shifted from the flat white of complete whiteout to something with faint direction in it. And Noah said, studying it, that the worst of it might be past by tomorrow. Anna was feeling her ribs, which were sore but stable, and she was feeling something else too, something she was finding it increasingly difficult to redirect into more practical channels. She sat at the table across from him while he worked on cleaning a trap that needed maintenance, and she watched his hands, the sureness of them, the careful way they moved even on an unconscious task. And she thought about last night's conversation and the one before that. And she thought about the way he always set her coffee in front of her before she thought to ask for it. And she thought about the wolf pelt he had brought in from the cold and how he had said, when he hung it, that he would have tanned it by spring for a coat, and she had said, without thinking, that it would be warm, and he had said, looking at her with a directness that had not seemed possible to look away from, yes, it would, It was, she told herself firmly, simply proximity, simply gratitude, simply the way that shared danger created bonds that the ordinary world would not have generated. She told herself this, and she believed approximately half of it. He looked up from the trap and found her watching him, and instead of looking away as she probably should have, she held it. "You want to ask me something," he said. "Several things," she said honestly. The corner of his mouth moved. "Ask them." "Do you ever intend to come back down from the mountain," she said, "permanently, into a town?" He set the trap down and leaned back in his chair, and she could see him actually considering the question, not dodging it or managing it, but genuinely thinking it through. "I've thought about it," he said. "Some, not seriously." "Why not seriously?" "Towns want a particular kind of man," he said. "Man who fits in a particular kind of space. I'm not sure I'm that." "Clearwater has all kinds of men," she said, and she was aware, as she said it, that she was making an argument for something she had not yet consciously decided to argue for. He watched her. "Does Clearwater have a need for a man who traps and hunts and knows the mountains?" "It has needs for everything," she said. "It's a growing town. They've been talking about a full-time guide for the surveys the land office keeps trying to run up into the foothills." She did not know why she was saying all of this. She told herself she was simply providing factual information. She told herself the warmth in her chest when he listened to her with that complete attention was nothing significant. She was a practical woman, and this was a practical situation, and in 2 days she would ride back down this mountain, and that would be that. He said nothing to the land office argument, but he looked at her with an expression she was beginning to catalog. The expression he wore when something had reached him, and he was deciding what to do with it. They ate together again at noon, beans this time from a crock he had prepared, with dried meat, simple and filling, and she helped him without being asked, and he let her without making it notable, and she found herself thinking that this was the most natural domestic arrangement she had experienced in longer than she could clearly remember. In the afternoon, he showed her the rest of his supply shelf, because she had asked about it the day before, and he had clearly thought about it overnight and decided to answer fully. He had more than she had expected. His knowledge of plant medicine was not haphazard, but organized, genuinely systematic, learned partly from a Shoshone woman named Calling Bird who had traded him knowledge for pelts several winters before, partly from a collection of medical pamphlets he had acquired in Denver, partly from simple observation and trial. Anna listened to all of it with her full attention, and then began to ask questions that no one had asked her before, precise technical questions about application and preparation and concentration, and Noah answered them with an intelligence that she found herself unable to stop admiring. He was not educated in the formal sense. She could see that. But he was one of the most genuinely intelligent people she had ever met, with the kind of mind that took things apart and put them back together accurately, without ego interfering in the mechanism. "You could have been a physician," she said, meaning it as a compliment. "I could have been a lot of things," he said, with that almost smile. "Same as you," she looked up. "What do you mean?" "You could have gone to the cities," he said. "Bigger places, better resources, more recognition for what you know how to do." She was quiet a moment. "I could have," she admitted. "The hospitals in St. Louis, some of them were beginning to accept women in certain capacities. It would have been possible. But you chose the frontier." "I chose the place where the need was greatest," she said. "I suppose that's the same as choosing the frontier." He was looking at her with that full, direct attention that she had stopped trying to look away from. "That's not preference," he said quietly. "That's bravery." He was giving her back her own words from the night before, and she understood that he meant them the way she had meant them when she said them to him, as genuine recognition, not flattery, and she felt something happen in her chest that was much larger than she had been prepared for. She looked down at the table. She picked up her mug. She told herself again, firmly, that this was proximity and circumstance. She believed roughly none of it this time. The storm broke at some hour after midnight on the second night. Anna knew it the moment she woke, not from any conscious awareness of time but from the silence. The wind had stopped. The blizzard had wound itself out and departed and left the world in a profound, ringing quiet that was itself a sound, the sound of absence where roaring had been. She lay still in the bearskin darkness and listened to it and felt, with a complexity she did not entirely want to examine, that the stillness was the end of something. She got up before dawn and put wood on the fire, because Noah was sleeping near the hearth and had clearly been tending it through the night, and she could see in the banked embers that it needed feeding. She did this quietly, with the care of someone not wanting to wake another person, and she was good at quiet. 3 years of approaching sick beds in the dark had made her so, and she had the fire going properly again before she heard him shift. He was awake, she realized, and had been watching her tend his fire, and when she turned and found his eyes open in the firelight, there was an expression on his face that she had not seen before. Something softer and more open than what he usually let show, something that came from the specific vulnerability of having been watched while one was supposed to be asleep, and having felt safe enough not to close against it. "The storm stopped," she said. "Yes," he said. They looked at each other across the cabin for a long moment in the firelight, and she was aware of everything at once, the nearness of him, the warmth of the room, the silence outside, the fact that this particular kind of enclosure was about to end, and she was aware with a sudden and uncomplicated clarity that she did not want it to end. She looked away first. "I should try to reach the Callaway homestead at first light," she said. "If the trail is passable." He sat up. "I'll take you," he said. No hesitation. She looked back. "That isn't necessary." "The snow will be deep," he said. "Trail will be buried. You'll need someone who knows the ground under the white." He paused and looked at her with the directness that was simply his fundamental nature. "And I know this ground." She nodded, because he was right, and because she had no argument against it, and also because a part of her that she was doing a very poor job of managing was simply glad. At dawn, he saddled his horse, a large dark bay gelding he called Barley, built for mountain country with big hooves and a broad chest, and they set out in the brilliant, blinding aftermath of the storm. The world was entirely remade. Everything that had existed before was buried, softened, transformed, and the sun coming over the eastern ridge hit the new snow at an angle that turned the whole mountainside to a field of fractured light. Anna rode behind him, her arms necessarily around his waist for the portions of the trail where the snowdrift was deep enough to require Barley to plunge rather than step through it, and she was aware of the solid, immovable reality of his back against her, and the steadiness with which he guided the horse through territory he clearly knew bone deep, and she thought, holding on as the horse lunged through a 4-foot drift, that there were worse things in the world than being held to the broad back of a capable man in beautiful country on a bright winter morning. They reached the Callaway homestead in an hour and a half. As they approached, a figure came out onto the porch of the solid farmhouse and stood there watching them, and Anna recognized Hector Callaway, a big fair-haired man who ran cattle and looked perpetually worried, which was either his natural expression or the expression of a man who had been awake for 3 days watching his wife labor. The expression on his face when he saw Anna was something she would carry with her for a long time. She was off the horse before it stopped fully and moving toward the house, pulling her bag from her shoulder, already asking questions. The baby had come, Hector told her, his voice thick, 4 hours ago, with the help of his older daughter Clara and the midwife knowledge Clara had picked up helping Anna on 2 previous occasions. The baby was a boy. He was small, but he was breathing and his color was good. Edith was exhausted and had lost more blood than Hector was comfortable with, but she was conscious and asking for tea. Anna went in and found Edith Callaway propped on pillows in the back bedroom, holding a small, red-faced infant wrapped in flannel, with Clara sitting beside her looking simultaneously ancient and 17, the way young people looked when they had done something they hadn't known they were capable of. Anna checked Edith with professional thoroughness, examined the baby, confirmed Clara's instinctive choices had been sound, and treated what needed treating, And then she sat at Edith's bedside for a time and held the woman's hand and told her she had done well and that her son was healthy and that Clara had done magnificently. "I prayed you get through," Edith said, her voice soft with tiredness. "I couldn't," Anna said honestly. "I was stuck in the storm, but you didn't need me." "We all need you," Edith said simply and squeezed her hand. When Anna came back out to the porch, Noah was standing in the yard with his horse, having declined Hector's invitation inside with the polite immovability of a man who was comfortable in himself and did not require company to confirm it. He was looking out at the mountains, at the white expanse of the post-storm world, his broad shoulders set against the sky. He turned when he heard her step. "How are they?" he asked. "Good," she said. "All three of them good." She felt the relief of it moving through her in a long, slow wave, the particular relief of the healer who has been unable to help, and found that help found its own way. Something of that relief must have showed in her face, because Noah Lockhart, who expressed things economically and carefully, crossed the yard to her in 3 long strides, and before she had properly registered that he was moving, she was pressed against the solid warmth of his chest with his arms around her, enormous and careful and certain, and it was the most specific feeling of safety she had experienced in years. She let herself be held. She put her forehead against his collarbone, and she let go of the 2 days of anxiety and worry and professional guilt, and she breathed, and he held her with the steady, unhurried care of someone who did not intend to rush anything, and did not need her to apologize for needing this. After a moment she lifted her head. They were very close. His eyes found hers with the direct, unclouded honesty of everything else about him. "Anna," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in that low, unhurried voice did something to her she was not prepared for and did not attempt to manage. "Yes," she said, which was not an answer to anything he had asked and was simultaneously an answer to everything. He kissed her, slow and certain, the way he did all things, one large hand coming up to cup the side of her face with a gentleness that was more affecting for the power that contained it, and she kissed him back with everything she had been setting aside for 2 days, and the cold winter air and the white mountain light, and the sound of the baby crying inside the warm farmhouse wrapped around them both. Hector Calloway, watching from the window, told Edith about it later, and she smiled and said she had suspected something like that was coming the moment she saw them ride up together. The ride back down the mountain to Clearwater took the better part of the afternoon. They went slowly because the trail was treacherous, and because there was no particular urgency now, and they talked. Not about what had happened in the yard at the Calloway farm, not yet, but about everything else, the way people talk when something has been said, and both of them know it and neither wants to rush the space around it. He asked about her house in Clearwater. She described it, a small 2-room house adjacent to the building she used as a medical room, practical and spare and clean, with a good vegetable plot out back in summer and a frost-killed ruin of one in November. He asked about her work, the daily texture of it, what was hardest, what was most rewarding. She told him about a man named Pete Garfield, who had come to her 9 months ago with a wound in his leg that had gone septic, and that she had spent 4 days treating against all reasonable expectation, and who had kept his leg and his life, and still brought her a jar of his wife's preserved peaches every time he came into town. She told him about the children she had helped into the world, 12 of them over 3 years, and the 2 she hadn't been able to save, and the way those 2 lived in a particular space inside her. He listened. When she talked about the 2 children, he said nothing, but he moved Barley closer to her for a while, and she felt his leg alongside hers, and she understood that he understood. She asked him what he did in the long winters alone. He described it. The maintenance of the cabin, the trapping and the tracking, the reading he did in the evenings, the way the silence of deep winter had its own qualities that changed week by week in ways that he had learned to read like a language. He talked about the animals he had observed over years, the particular intelligence of wolves, the family structures of elk, the way grizzlies in the brief period of pre-denning spent time doing things that looked, if you watched them long enough, almost like play. She asked if he had anyone. He said no. She asked if he had ever had anyone. He was quiet for longer than usual, and then he said there had been a woman in Colorado a few years back, and she had found the mountains too lonely and him too much committed to them, and they had parted without drama or bitterness on either side, and he had thought afterward that the issue was not the mountains and not her, but the fact that he had not yet met anyone where the specifics of him and the specifics of her had any real purchase on each other. He said it simply and directly, looking ahead at the trail. Anna held that for a long time, riding down through the snow-silenced pines. "That seems like a clear way of putting it," she said finally. "I've had time to think it through," he said. "Do the specifics of me have purchase on you?" she asked, and was proud of how steadily she asked it. He looked at her sideways, that near smile, those river water eyes. "Yes," he said, "they do." She faced forward again. "Good," she said. "The specifics of you have a considerable amount of purchase on me." They rode into Clearwater in the low gold light of late afternoon, the town looking small and ordinary and warmly human below the vast white mountains, smoke from a dozen chimneys, the sound of someone hammering somewhere, a dog barking at their horses as they came down the main street. Anna was aware of people noticing them. The small-town mechanisms of observation and inference were already turning. She could see it in the way old Hennessy came out onto the porch of his general store and then came down the steps with an expression of considerable interested surprise. "Miss Reed," Hennessy said, "Lord Almighty, we thought you were stuck in that storm. We had men ready to go looking at first light if it hadn't cleared." "I found shelter," she said, and she was aware of the warmth in her face saying more than her words. Hennessy looked past her to Noah with the complex expression of a small-town man encountering the person he described as a curiosity coming down from the mountain beside the woman everyone in Clearwater knew and respected. "Mr. Lockhart," Hennessy said. "Well, thank you for looking after her." Noah nodded once. He helped Anna down from Barley with the unself-conscious assurance of a man helping a woman he was entitled to help, and she let him. And when her feet were on the ground, they stood very close together for a moment. "Come in for supper," she said quietly. "You've ridden all day." He looked at her. Then he looked at the town around them, at Hennessy, at the two women who had appeared in the doorway of the dress shop across the street, at the general evidence of a small community already composing its narrative. "All right," he said. She fed him the best supper she could manage on short notice, which was considerably better than it might have been because she was a capable cook who took satisfaction in it, and they sat at her small kitchen table in the light of 2 oil lamps and ate and talked, and then they talked more after eating, and the evening stretched past what was conventional, and Anna did not feel any particular impulse to end it, and Noah showed no sign of moving toward the door. "I should let you sleep," he said eventually. "You haven't rested properly in days." "Neither have you," she said. "You slept on your own floor. I've slept in worse places." "That isn't a recommendation," she said. He smiled then fully for the first time she had seen, and it changed his whole face in a way that made her breath come slightly short. It was a good smile, honest and unexpected, like sunlight through cloud cover. "I'll come back in a few days," he said, "once you've had time to settle." "I would like that very much," she said. He came back in a few days, and then again after that. And what had begun as a winter pattern became a spring pattern, and then a summer one. Noah coming down from the mountain at increasingly frequent intervals, sometimes for days at a time, and the Clearwater community, with the practical wisdom of a frontier town that had bigger things to worry about than who visited whom, eventually simply incorporated it into their understanding of things without much more ceremony than necessary. He began to take on some of the scouting work for the land office surveys, exactly as Anna had mentioned the possibility of. He knew the country in the Absaroka foothills better than any man in the territory, and the surveyors, initially skeptical of a mountain man who operated by preference rather than by the constraints of bureaucratic necessity, were won over by results before the spring was finished. He was in Clearwater often enough now that he had taken a room above the hardware store, though he spent as many nights at the cabin as the work allowed, and Anna was aware that she was moving, with a deliberateness that she had begun to embrace rather than manage, towards something she had not allowed herself to imagine in the 3 years she had been in Clearwater. They had not spoken directly about it. Not yet. They did not need to, in the way that people who communicate honestly do not need to name what is growing between them, because both of them can already see it clearly. What precipitated the conversation in the end was not a romantic evening or a planned moment but a Thursday afternoon in June, when Anna was treating a rancher named Cole Briggs for a badly infected tooth, which was the unsexy reality of frontier medicine, and Noah came in halfway through the procedure because he had the habit of stopping by when he was in town, and Cole Briggs, who was from the school of male frontier thought that expressed pain only as aggression, looked up at Noah with streaming eyes from where he was sitting in Anna's medical chair and said, through a mouth full of Anna's instruments, something that sounded approximately like, "You planning on marrying this woman or?" Not because she's too good to keep in suspense. Anna removed the instruments from Cole's mouth with dignity. She said, "I am not in suspense." Noah, who had been standing in the doorway with an expression of patient amusement, said, "You're not." She looked at him steadily. "No," she said, "I know what you are going to say. I'm simply waiting for you to say it." Cole Briggs in the chair looked at both of them and said, "Well, go ahead and say it then, son, before she changes her mind." Noah came into the room. He looked at Anna with the full, unguarded directness that she had come to know as his truest expression, the one that existed beneath the stillness and the quietness and the careful management of words. "I love you," he said, as straightforwardly as he said everything, no ornamentation, no theater, just the flat, honest fact of it. "I know that. I've known it since the mountain. I want to marry you if you'll have me." Cole Briggs made a sound of approval from the chair. Anna Reed, who had spent 3 years being essential to everyone and intimate with no one, and who had knocked on a stranger's door in a blizzard and found herself, looked at Noah Lockhart and felt the last of whatever she had been holding tightly inside herself simply let go. "Yes," she said, the same word she had said in the Callaway farmyard and with the same meaning. "Obviously, yes." Noah crossed the room and kissed her with Cole Briggs as their witness, which was not the circumstance either of them would have chosen, but which Clearwater would remember and repeat with considerable warmth for years afterward. They were married in October of 1879, just before the first snows of what would prove a milder winter than the one that had trapped them. The ceremony was performed by the circuit preacher, a practical man named Reverend Holt, who was accustomed to performing marriages with minimal fuss and maximum sincerity, in the small church that the Clearwater community had built the previous spring. Half the town came, which was to say almost all of it, because Anna was everyone's healer and Noah had, over the course of the summer, become in his quiet, unhurried way the kind of man a town relies on, someone who knew the country and could be counted on and who turned out, when you got past the stillness, to have a dry humor and a genuine decency that made him easy to trust. Edith Callaway brought the baby, whose name was James, and who was by then a fat, cheerful 7-month-old with his father's fair hair and his mother's stubborn expression. Clara Callaway, who had delivered him, stood in the church looking proud in the specific way of a young person who has done something genuinely important, and Anna caught her eye and smiled the smile of mutual respect that transcended their 8-year age difference. Noah, standing at the front of the church in the best shirt he owned, which he had bought new for the occasion at Hennessy's store, looked at Anna walking toward him and felt something move through him that was nothing like what he had been before, not less than it but more, as though the person he had been in the long solitary years in the mountains had been complete in himself, and was now discovered to have been, the whole time, the foundation for something larger. Anna wore her mother's dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, ivory wool with blue ribbon, and she carried dried wildflowers because it was October and the meadows were done. Her hair was down for the only time that anyone in Clearwater had seen it, dark auburn and long, and when she reached the front of the church and Noah took her hand, she looked up at him with those green eyes that missed nothing, and she thought that the blizzard had been the best thing that had ever happened to her. They said their vows in the plain language of the frontier church, and they meant every word, and when Reverend Holt pronounced them married, Noah bent down and kissed her with the unhurried certainty that was fundamental to him, and the church made the warm, complicated noise of a community witnessing something that has come right. The reception was held in the hardware store, the largest interior space in Clearwater, with tables borrowed from every establishment in town and food brought by enough people that there was far more than anyone could eat, and the remaining portion fed the town's less fortunate residents for 2 days afterward, which Anna had quietly arranged in advance because that was the kind of person she was. Hennessy, who was by nature a narrator of community events, found himself at a slight loss for the right summary of the evening, and eventually settled for telling his wife, as they walked home, that it had been the most decent wedding he had attended in 30 years on the frontier, and that he was satisfied. They spent the winter in Clearwater, in Anna's small house, which was larger than it had been because Noah had, over the summer months, added a room to the back with his own hands. The same unhurried competence applied to wood and stone that he applied to everything else. A proper bedroom with a south-facing window that caught the morning light, and shelves built into the walls that held, by November, an equal mixture of Anna's medical texts and Noah's small collection of books, together with her herbs and his. Organized in a system that was entirely the product of two people who communicated clearly, he kept the mountain cabin. He went up when the survey work required it, and sometimes simply because the mountains were part of him in a way that Clearwater, much as he had come to value it, did not fully replace. Anna understood this. She did not ask him to give it up. She knew who she had married, and she had married all of him, mountains included. In February she told him she was pregnant. She told him in the kitchen at breakfast, matter-of-factly, because that was her way, placing his coffee in front of him and saying, "I believe I'm carrying your child." He looked up from the mug she had set down. He looked at her standing across the table from him, and the expression on his face was the fullest, most unguarded thing she had ever seen from him, wide open in the way of a person receiving something they had wanted without having properly let themselves know they were wanting it. He stood up in the small kitchen, which always reminded her of the first time she had seen him fill a doorway, and he came around the table and put his hands very carefully on her face, tilting it up, and looked at her for a long moment before he kissed her forehead. "Good," he said, which was an entirely insufficient word and was somehow exactly right. The pregnancy moved through the spring and summer with the robust, uncomplicated progress that Anna, being both the patient and the physician in this case, monitored with professional thoroughness. She was healthy and the baby was healthy, and she continued working through most of it, because the people of Clearwater needed her, and she was not inclined to stop being necessary simply because she was growing a human, though Noah drew the line at her attempting to ride far up the mountain in July, and she conceded this point with less argument than she might have offered in the past. He was attentive in the specific way of a man who loved deeply and expressed it through action rather than language, though he had learned, over the months since the wedding, to say the language too, because she had told him once, gently and directly, that she valued hearing it, and he had taken this information and applied it with characteristic seriousness. He would bring her things from the mountain, herbs for her medicine shelf, stones from a high creek that had particular colors she liked, once a hawk feather from a nest site he had found, and he would say, when he set them on the table, that he had thought of her, and the matter-of-fact simplicity of it was better to her than any elaborate declaration could have been. Their son was born in late October of 1880, exactly 1 year and a handful of days after their wedding. He was born in their home bedroom with the south window showing a clean late October dawn, and with Anna's good friend and neighbor, a capable woman named Margaret Hayes who had delivered 3 children of her own and assisted at a dozen others, helping alongside. Noah was present, which was not the common practice, and which several of Clearwater's men found puzzling when they heard about it later, but which Anna had simply told him was what she wanted, and which he had agreed to without question. He held her hand through the hard hours, steady and immovable, and when the baby arrived and his first cry split the October morning, Noah looked at the small, fierce, thoroughly present new person in Margaret Hayes's capable hands and then at Anna, who was exhausted and luminous and watching him with eyes that were full of everything she felt, and he could not speak for a long moment. "He looks furious," he finally said, which was accurate. The baby had the red, outraged expression of someone who had strong opinions about being born and was not finished sharing them. Anna laughed, tired and wholly happy. "He looks like you," she said. "The furious part or the other part?" "Both parts," she said, and he bent and kissed her temple and her cheek and then looked back at his son, and the expression on his face was something Margaret Hayes would describe to her own daughter years later as the look of a man who has found the center of his life and knows it. They named him Eli James Lockhart. James for the Callaway baby, born in the blizzard, who had in some sense been waiting for them at the end of that particular journey. It felt right to Anna, the continuity of it, the way that night of fear and weather had threaded itself through everything that followed. Eli was a boy of considerable character from the very beginning, loud and curious and insistently physical, pulling himself upright on everything available at 8 months and walking, unsteadily but with great conviction, before his first birthday. He had Noah's eyes, the deep gray-green that shifted with the light, and Anna's coloring, the dark auburn that appeared already in the fine hair beginning to thicken on his head, and he had from some combination of them both a stubbornness that made both parents alternately proud and exhausted. The winter of 1881 was mild, and the spring that followed it was among the most beautiful Anna had seen in her years in Wyoming, the meadows above town coming into full bloom in waves of gold and purple that the long mild cold had somehow intensified, and Noah, who had completed a second season of survey work for the land office, and who had also begun, at the prompting of the town council, to lead occasional parties of travelers through the mountain passes for the growing traffic moving through the region, found himself spending more time in Clearwater than he had ever imagined he would, and finding that it suited him. He had kept the mountain cabin, maintained it and used it in the hunting seasons and the deep winters of the survey work, and it was still part of him. The mountains were still where he breathed most freely, but he had discovered something that his 30 years of largely solitary living had not offered him the opportunity to learn, which was that the mountains were better, finally, when you had somewhere to come down to, and someone who mattered waiting there. He said this to Anna one evening in their kitchen in the second spring, while she was working on a letter to a medical supply company in Cheyenne, and he was mending Eli's small boot, which Eli had destroyed with the thoroughness he applied to all material objects, and it was such a private, particular observation that she set down her pen and looked at him across the table with a fullness of feeling that she thought she would probably carry in the specific memory of that kitchen and that lamplight for the rest of her life. "Tell me more about that," she said. He looked up from the boot. He looked at her with the directness that was his nature and said, "You are the somewhere I come down to." "You and Eli, that's what I mean." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He turned it and held it, warm and certain, the scar on the back of his hand that she had memorized in the firelight of that first night fitting between her fingers the way a familiar thing settles into its place. "We'll always be here," she said. "I know," he said. "That's the thing." Clearwater continued to grow through the early 1880s. The way frontier towns grew when the land around them proved generous. The cattle operations expanding, new families arriving, a second general store opening in 1882 that Hennessy met with elaborate composure, and several months of competitive pricing. A school was built in 1883, which was important for the children who were multiplying in the community, and which made Anna think, in the particular way that practical people thought about things, about Eli's education and what she wanted for him. She wanted him to know the mountains the way his father knew them. She wanted him to know medicine the way she knew it. She wanted him to know books and languages and mathematics and history, all the things that the frontier, for its beauty and its particular fullness of life, did not always make accessible. She talked to Noah about it on a summer evening in their yard, watching Eli chase fireflies with the abandon of a 3-year-old for whom the world is entirely made of wonder. "He'll go to the school," Noah said, "when he's ready." "And after the school," she said. "After the school," Noah said, "he'll make his own way, with what we give him." She looked at Noah, who had left Missouri at 17 and made himself, with his own mind and his own 2 hands and the mountains as his university, into someone she considered among the most complete people she had ever known. She thought about what a person could build from the right foundations, even on a frontier. "He has good parents," she said. Noah looked at her. "He has the best mother I can imagine," he said, which was specific and honest and not designed for effect, and she felt it in her chest the way she felt all the truest things he said. Eli had caught a firefly. He was holding his cupped hands up to the dark sky, watching the light pulse through his fingers, his small face illuminated by it, his eyes enormous with delight. He looked so much like Noah in that moment, the quality of his attention, the stillness of his focus, that Anna felt a rush of something so large it almost frightened her. "Noah," she said. He looked at her. "I'm pregnant again," she said. He said nothing for a moment. Then he reached over and put his arm around her, drawing her against his side, solid and warm and entirely certain. "Good," he said again, and this time she did not think the word was insufficient at all. Their daughter arrived in the spring of 1884. She was born easier than Eli, arriving in the early morning with considerably less drama, as though she had assessed the situation in advance and decided efficiency was the appropriate approach. She had Anna's green eyes and Noah's dark hair, and she was quiet and watchful in the first hours of her life, looking at the world with an expression of focused assessment that made both her parents laugh. They named her Clara, for the girl who had delivered James Calloway in the blizzard, the girl who had done the thing that needed doing when the ordinary resources were unavailable. It seemed to Anna like the right kind of name for a daughter, a name that meant competence and courage in the face of what the world handed you. Eli received his sister with the generous proprietary interest of a 3-year-old who had been told, carefully and repeatedly, that this was a person he was responsible for. He looked at her in Noah's arms on the morning she arrived and said, with the directness of small children who have absorbed qualities from their parents, "She is very small." "She'll grow," Noah said. "I will teach her things," Eli said. "Yes," said Noah. "You will." Anna, watching this from her pillow, thought about 2 people in a cabin in a blizzard and the extraordinary machinery of consequence that a single storm had set in motion, and she felt a gratitude so large and so deep that it had no proper bottom to it. The years that followed were good years, the kind of years that a person builds and inhabits and that seem ordinary from inside them, but are, in retrospect, the very substance of a life well lived. Noah guided surveys through the Absaroka foothills every spring, building a reputation that eventually brought him work from the territorial government itself. He kept the mountain cabin and used it every fall, coming back to Clearwater with the particular cleanliness that time alone in wild country gave him, and returning to himself in Anna's presence in the way she had once described to Margaret Hayes as the mutual replenishment of 2 people who genuinely belonged together. Anna expanded her medical practice as Clearwater grew, eventually constructing a proper two-room clinic with an examination room and a small dispensary, funded partly by the town and partly by a collection organized by Edith Calloway, who had never forgotten the woman who had tried to reach her in the blizzard and the man who had sheltered her, and who had been among the first to understand what the outcome of that storm would be. James Calloway, the boy born in the blizzard, grew up knowing Anna Reed as the town healer and Noah Lockhart as the man who knew every trail in the Absaroka Range. And when he was 19, he came to Noah and asked to apprentice with him in the survey work. And Noah said yes, because the boy had good eyes and good feet and the patience for mountain country. And Anna smiled when she heard about it because there was a completeness to it that satisfied something deep in her. Eli grew into himself with the best of both his parents, the mountains and the medicine, Noah's physical presence and Anna's precision, his father's eyes and his mother's relentlessness. He went to the school in Clearwater, and then, at 16, to a larger school in Cheyenne, and then to a college in the East, which required a conversation between his parents that lasted 3 evenings and resolved with Noah saying, with characteristic economy, that a person ought to go as far as their mind could take them and not stop because the country was new, and Anna saying that she had always believed that and was glad his father agreed. Clara watched her brother go with the focused assessment that had been her fundamental quality from the first hours of her life, and then set about her own education with the thoroughness of someone who has done their planning in advance. By the time she was 12, she was assisting Anna in the clinic on Saturday mornings, handing instruments with the steady competence of someone twice her age. And Anna thought, watching her daughter's careful hands, that some things passed from person to person in ways that had nothing to do with bloodline and everything to do with the particular gravity of attention. On the evening of the 15th anniversary of the blizzard that had changed their lives, which Anna noted on the calendar with a private precision that Noah found entirely consistent with her character, they sat together on the porch of their house in Clearwater, the house that had been extended twice over the years to accommodate the life that had grown inside it, and they watched the last light leave the Wyoming sky over the mountains. The mountains were already wearing their first November snow. The air had the particular sharpness of early winter that Anna had come to love because it was the air of the night she had found him, and he had opened the door, and everything had begun. "I've been thinking about the cabin," Noah said. She looked at him. He was 45 now, the hair at his temples gone silver, the lines around his eyes deeper, still the same solid, immovable physical reality that he had been at 30, still the same quality of presence that had made her feel, in the first moment she had looked up at him in the blizzard's aftermath, that here was a person who did not require the world to be other than it was. "What about it?" she said. "Eli asked me about it," he said. Whether it might be available, she felt something move through her. Eli was 25, back from the East with a degree in engineering and an engagement to a girl from Denver named Maria who had dark eyes and a laugh that reminded Anna, the first time she heard it, of the way good things announce themselves. "He wants the cabin," she said. "He wants to know the mountains," Noah said, "the way I know them." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the snow on the peaks, at the last gold in the sky above them. "Tell him yes," she said. Noah put his arm around her and she leaned into him, into the warmth and the solidity of 15 years of this. And she thought about a woman on a mountainside in a blizzard with nothing but a medical bag and a rifle and the determination not to freeze, and a man in a doorway who had simply stepped back and opened it wide, and how everything that mattered in her life had walked through that opening. "What are you thinking?" He asked low and close, the way he asked when he already knew the general shape of the answer and wanted the specific one. "I'm thinking about the storm," she said. "The way it came without warning, the way it took everything and left you." "Left you at my door," he said. "Left me at your door," she agreed. He pressed his lips to her temple, stayed there, the way he sometimes did with a patience that she had understood over 15 years, was not patience at all, but simply the expression of wanting to remain as long as possible in the particular place he was. "Best thing that ever happened to me," he said quietly, "was that storm." She turned her head and looked at him fully. This man she had found in the wilderness. This man who had opened his door and his fire and his extraordinary, careful, deeply private self to her because the code of the mountains and the code of his own nature had not allowed him to do otherwise, and who had turned out to be, in ways she could never have planned or predicted or sought, the exact complement to everything she was. "And me," she said. Inside the house, Clara was setting the supper table, her movements audible through the window, the click and settle of the familiar domestic music of their life. Outside, the mountains stood in their November white against the darkening sky, ancient and indifferent and magnificent, the same mountains that had generated the blizzard, the same blizzard that had generated everything. Clearwater's lights came on one by one in the early dark, a constellation at the foot of the Absaroka Range, each light a house and a household, and a life being lived in the particular difficult, beautiful way of the frontier. And Anna and Noah Lockhart sat on their porch in the cold, clean air, and watched it all together and completely, in the unhurried way of people who have found their place in the world, and do not intend to be anywhere else. The wind came down from the mountains, cold and smelling of pine and snow, and Anna pulled her coat closer and Noah's arm tightened around her, and neither of them said anything at all, because there was nothing that needed saying that had not already been said, and nothing that needed doing that was not already done, and the life they had built from a single winter storm was everything, and enough, and more than enough, and whole.